Hello again, and welcome to Lecture 6 of the course The Examined Life, which is part of the Philosophy for Living series. In this lecture, I'm going to look at the issues of meaning and purpose in life. By now, if you've followed the different exercises and done some of the reading of the previous lectures, you will have some sense of the kind of awareness we've been talking about yourself as a person, your history, your roots, the influences that brought you to where you are now, the sense that you're at a point in your life where you have some choices, and maybe a broader picture of the kind of possibilities that can open up for you, and the kind of resources you need to make decisions to make some changes. Things that you may let go of in the past, and maybe a better understanding of your past, and maybe parts of those experiences and things that you've learned and experienced that you no longer need to hold on to, and maybe experiences that you've had that you've learned from and you look at in terms of things that suggest that these need to be a greater part of your future. So essentially that takes us to this next piece about meaning and purpose in life. And one writer, John Gray, says, he said, other animals do not need a purpose in life, a contradiction to itself. The human animal cannot do without one. So what he's referencing here is that for most people, the sense of having a purpose in their lives is very important. The father of logotherapy, Viktor Frankl, who we've come across already in our conversations, saw this as an essential element of mental health. He believed that having a sense of purpose in life was a critical part of being able to manage what he called the tragic triad of life: suffering, guilt, and death. Friedrich Nietzsche also believed that having a sense of purpose in life was very important. He said that he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. So in other words, he's saying to us that, our resilience, our capacity to cope with things will really, really be benefited with if we have a sense of purpose, something that draws us, something that pulls us. So the first thing I want to do is want to make a bit of a distinction between meaning and purpose. They're very concepts that overlap, but they're not quite the same. And most of the focus in today is going to be looking at purpose, a sense of purpose in life, but I do need to reference the issue of meaning in life. So the best way I can describe this is to think about the use of a sentence. We'll take a sentence, say, John is going to visit his mother. Now that sentence has meaning. When you listen to it, it makes sense. And the reason it has meaning is that it's describing something that coheres, that's coherent. John is going to visit his mother. It has a subject, John. It has an object, his mother. And going to visit, and that's the verbal form. So that fits together. So the sentence has meaning because it all fits together in a meaningful way. So when you talk about meaning in life, we're describing the notion that life itself has meaning. It's coherent. It comes together and it makes sense. So this is a very big picture. The meaning of the sentence is that John is going to visit his mother. What is the purpose of the sentence? The purpose of the sentence is perhaps to relay some information. So it might be his sister wondering, where is he? It could be a telephone call to his father saying, where's John? Well, John is going to visit his mother. So the purpose of the sentence is to do something, to create something, to make something happen. So when we talk about meaning in life, we're looking at a broad umbrella and a belief system that makes sense of life. It suggests that the whole picture makes some kind of sense. When we talk about purpose in life, we don't have to have that big picture. We can have a smaller picture, which is that I'm choosing to give my life a sense of purpose. I'm deciding to do something different. So the two things are something unique to me. So the two things are slightly different. Now, obviously, they relate to each other because what you believe about the meaning of life may be the thing that provides you with the sense of purpose. So for somebody who has a strong religious faith in the meaning of life, they would say, well, my purpose in life is to serve the will of God. But you could have somebody who doesn't believe that life has any intrinsic meaning at all, but they could still say, well, I am choosing a purpose for my life. He's all of this bits and pieces that put me together. I want to do something with it. So, in the main, our purposes in life throughout history have, for most people, been given to them by the concept of meaning, by the picture, the big picture. And the big picture for most people in the Western world, to some extent in Eastern philosophy as well, has been through the vehicle of religion. Religion is probably the universal meaning structure that gave people a sense of purpose. But things have changed, so we're being challenged more, because the power that was religion, for many people in the West in particular, is not as strong, it's not as coherent, it's not as available to many people. Now, this doesn't mean that there are many people who find a great consolation and a sense of purpose in their religious belief. But in the West, largely, not so much in America, although it's getting there, but certainly in the West, in the European cultures and societies, the power that was religion has lost some of its sway. And one of the philosophers that probably captured this better than any other was Friedrich Nietzsche. And I want to start our conversation today with another great piece of philosophical literature. Remember, we started our course with the allegory of the cave. Well, now we're going to talk about Nietzsche's parable of the madman. And I'm going to read it and I'm going to discuss it. And what it's really going to do is going to help us to understand what Nietzsche saw as the crisis for purpose in life that came with what he called the death of God. He says, "Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace, and cried incessantly, 'I seek God, I seek God'? As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. 'Has he got lost?' asked one of them. 'Did he lose his way?' referencing God. 'Did he lose his way like a child?' Asked another. 'Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage, emigrated?' Thus they yelled and they laughed." So you notice that the madman goes to the marketplace to seek God. That's an important little detail in there. In a world where capitalism and where shopping and where the market has replaced a great deal of spirituality, it's interesting that Nietzsche chose to say that the madman went to the marketplace. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. So you can try and imagine this picture. "Where is God?" he cried. "I will tell you. We have killed him. You and I, all of us, are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea?" See, the power of religion is, extraordinary. The idea that Nietzsche's image here is, it's like drinking the sea to kill God. "Who gave us a sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun?" Or we could go back to Plato and think about the sun as the source of all light. Here's Nietzsche telling us that we've unchained the earth, the material world, from the sun, the source. Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually backwards, sideways, forwards, in all directions? So here's the chaos that comes with losing the anchor of God. Do we not feel the breath of an empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the gravediggers who are burying God? I wonder who he means here by the gravediggers who are burying God. Do we smell nothing yet of the divine decomposition? God's to decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. Wonderful imagery here. Then he goes on to the impact of that. And he says, "How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood off us?" What water is there for us to clean ourselves? How can we be redeemed from this great crime of killing God? See, that's what he's asking. What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent? What a wonderful idea, the idea that we now have to invent sacred games to replace what religion had offered us. Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we ourselves not become gods simply to appear worthy of it? Here Nietzsche is saying something extraordinarily insightful. We ourselves will need to replace God by becoming gods ourselves. We'll elevate our selfhood, elevate our humanity into the divine. And this is very interesting, because this is before the turn of the 20th century, where as he kind of could foresee coming down the road what's going to happen. What happened during the 20th century? We elevated certain people into the realm of the divine. They were the dictators and the despots who led millions into their doom. So he says, must we not become gods ourselves simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us, for the sake of this deed, he will belong to a higher history than all history heretofore. So he delivers this to the people in the marketplace. Then the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners. And they too were silent and stared at him with astonishment. You can imagine that when they were laughing and joking, and suddenly he's laying out a picture for these people. At last he threw his lantern to the ground, and it broke into pieces and went out. He said, I have come too early. My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. So here what he's saying is, it's happened already, but we don't fully understand the implications of it yet. You haven't felt that coldness yet. This deed is still more distant from them than most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves. It has been related further on the same day the madman forced his way into several churches, and there struck up his Requiem Aeternam Deo, which is a funeral rite. Led out and called to account, he is said always to have replied nothing but, what after all are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God? Now, what an extraordinary piece of literature, and how well he captures that sense of anomie, emptiness, fear, loss, that when you unhinge the earth from the sun, when you unhinge the human family from the faith that gave their lives meaning and purpose, what will you replace them with? But what he is saying is that we're not there yet, but here we are 150 years later, really beginning to see that actually, yes, not quite 150 years, but close enough, which in the history of the human family is just a moment. So, the world we live in, where we seek purpose and meaning in life, has changed, because the source of meaning that gives so many people a sense of connection, of meaning, of direction, has gone. And now we're left to have to become gods ourselves, to have to find some other sacred game to play, some other ritual. So I'm not going to go much further into the replacement for the rituals, because that belongs in the notion of, well, how do we now develop new ideologies and new rituals and new systems to replace religion, to give us an overall sense of meaning, because that brings us into the realm of ideological positions. And I'm going to deal with that with a whole other course, because that brings into politics and governance and all kinds of quite complex issues. And it's not necessary to understand to our course here. The focus of our course here is to live with deeper awareness and to examine your life. So what this offers us is just an awareness that what was often given to us that we could accept, Without that, we have to discover something for ourselves, and we need to give our lives a sense of purpose. So where do we get that sense of purpose then if we can't find it in that wonderful world of religion? There are people who will find that, and that's where they will do. But even then, they need to understand, if they want to understand it in terms of what's God's will for them. Of course, you can actually place your sense of purpose in life under the umbrella of God's will for you, but you still have the responsibility to figure out what it is. What's the purpose for your life? What do you do? How do you get at that? How do you grasp it? Okay, so we're going to look at a little bit of the direction that you need to take. The first thing you need to look at in terms of finding a purpose for your own life is the notion of leaving the herd. That we're going back to that Nietzschean idea again of the herd, and you will have looked at the lectures and you'll have thought about, what does that mean? It means actually looking at what you, the individual, unique human being that you are, what indications for the purpose, what do you want to use that individuality for? Where are you going to take those? And the herd, you see, the herd gives you an identity and it gives you a purpose. The wildebeest has a purpose. The unit of the wildebeest has the purpose of staying within the herd. That's all it needs to do. That's its purpose. It has been given the roadmap by their genetic inheritance. A human being cannot do that. Now they can try, but as they do try it, what happens is they shut down so much of what would give them a sense of purpose in life, and they take their lead from the herd. Henry David Thoreau wrote, he said, when he was thinking about this, about the masses, and he said, the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. You'll be very familiar with that. But if you continue, he said, what is called resignation is confirmed desperation. From the desperate city, you go to the desperate country and have to console yourself with the bravery of minks and muskrats. A stereotyped but unconscious despair is concealed even under what are called the games and amusements of mankind. There is no play in them, for this comes after work, but it is a characteristic of wisdom not to do desperate things. What Thoreau is telling us here is that oftentimes the games that we play, the engagement with the amusements, are in fact a replacement for any sense of purpose in your own life. It's a resignation of something. It conceals a despair. This is dark stuff, isn't it, really? And of course, when you look at something like football, Marx would have understood that religion was the opium of the people. Religion was the thing that actually kept people comfortable, gave them comfort while they were being exploited. Well, you could use a parallel here with Thoreau and say that the amusements are covering up a desperation among people, because so many people don't have a sense of purpose in their own lives. So they look outside themselves to become amused. The games that people play. And of course, sport now and it almost has a sort of a religious significance to it, if you think of what sport does. And I love the excitement of sports, and I'm a fan of certain, you think about in the English Premiership, it's very funny. I'm an Irishman living in the west of Ireland, and on a Saturday afternoon, if you go down to any of the pubs, they're going to be playing English Premiership football, and the fans will be watching. And I remember watching Barcelona playing Liverpool in the semi-final, I think, of the Europa League Cup Championship a couple of years ago, and they were, I think, 2-0 down, or 3-0 down, I think, against Barcelona with Messi and all of these, whatever. And it was they were going into the second leg 3-0 down, and actually they won. But there's a scene in that where, at the end of the match, the Liverpool team, their arms around each other, are all facing the Kop, which is the fans. And they're singing the anthem, "You'll Never Walk Alone." And it's the most amazingly kind of spiritually uplifting experience you could have. And I was watching the other people in the pub, and the grown men, and some of them could barely walk up to the bar, they were so fat, are so connected into their team that they're crying. They're crying. at this moment in time, this awesome, uplifting experience, joy and happiness. There wasn't one player on the Liverpool team, I think, that actually came from Liverpool. None of the people who'd been in the pub that I knew of knew anybody else in Liverpool, and most of them had never been there. What is that? We have to find meaning and purpose in life somewhere. So I'm not cynical about that. I think that that just tells us something about the human condition. It tells us something we need to find meaning and purpose. But that offers us something. But Thoreau is telling us it offers us something, but it doesn't offer us enough. It's an amusement. It gives us something. It allows us to get up on the Monday morning to go into maybe a dead-end job where you're bored and you're working 10-hour day to try and just make the bills, pay the bills, but you've got camaraderie and you've got companionship and you've got connection. You've got a human family because you can have laugh at the coffee break and you can talk about the game. So the Monday morning, the conversations about sport, this plays an enormous part in the lives of a lot of people. But I don't think it's enough. I don't think that it's rich enough or deep enough to offer the human soul what it needs when it comes to purpose in life. So leaving the herd does not mean dismissing, being cynical. It doesn't mean any of that, but it means saying I'm not going to define my sense of purpose in life simply by what's on offer by everybody else. I can visit that. I can enjoy that football game. I can be moved by that football as much as anybody else. And I can dance to music just as much as anybody else because I enjoy it. It brings joy. But does it offer me enough to give me a sense of purpose in life? No. So if that does not offer us, if the herd does not give you enough, where do you go from there? Well, one of the things that you need to look at is you need to find something that you can have a passion about. Find your passion. And another great philosopher, Søren Kierkegaard, he talks about this in relation to the importance of passion for a human spirit, human soul. He says, it is impossible to exist without passion unless we understand the word exist in the loose sense of so-called existence. So in other words, existence as in just being there, just sort of that flat, like the rock exists. But it's not existence in the sense of living, flourishing. It's just a rock. It's there. Every Greek thinker was therefore essentially a passionate thinker. I have often reflected on how one might bring a man into a state of passion. He was interested in this. He saw that part of the purpose in life journey was to find a passion, to become passionate about something. I have thought this in connection that if I could get him seated on a horse and the horse made to take fright and gallop wildly, or better still for the sake of bringing the passion out, if I could take a man who wanted to arrive at a certain place as quickly as possible and hence already had some passion and could set him astride a horse that can scarcely walk. And yet this is what existence is like if one is to become consciously aware of it. So you're on the horse of your life, but your horse is a nag. That's what living without a passion is like. It's just a slow trundling on to the end, just getting older. And there's that phrase sometimes that, sometimes an awful phrase, keeping on, keeping on. But then Kierkegaard offers an alternative, and he said, or if a driver were otherwise not especially inclined towards passion, if someone hitched a team of horses to a wagon for him, one of them a Pegasus and the other a worn-out jade, and told him to drive, I think one might succeed. So here we have now a comparison with passion. You've got the winged Pegasus, you've got the steed, something that brings you quickly, intensively towards your goal, whatever that is, whatever you're passionate about. And it is just this that meant to exist if one is to become conscious of it. Eternity is the winged horse, infinitely fast, and time is a worn-out jade. So eternity is a winged horse. So Kierkegaard was quite a religious man, spiritual man, a spiritual Christian. But I'm going to use his talking here in terms of that comparison between passion being the winged horse the individual being the driver. So you are on your winged horse. That's your passion. It brings you. That is to say, it's such a driver when his mode of existence is not an existence loosely so called, for then he's no driver, but a drunken peasant who lies asleep in the wagon and let the horses take care of themselves. So in other words, like some people, they're living their lives like they're a drunken peasant in the cart as life goes on. So how do we find your passion? Well, we have had some exercises earlier on that would actually help you to do that, which is to look at things where you find a sense that you something that really, really enthused you, excited you. And you think about that and you look and say, well, how do I bring that more into my life? What is it that what am I willing to give my heart and soul to? When we think about passion, one of the things we think about is love and a passionate romance or a passionate affair. See what that's about? And you can see it in the film world that it's elevated, and the whole concept of falling in love and all the rest of it elevated into this intense moment in time. But so we can all understand that, and most of us understand what it is to fall in love with somebody. To have that passion, you can't really sleep and you can't do anything except think about it, whatever. But what else could there be that could generate that kind of feeling? That kind of a sense of willing to throw caution to the wind a little bit here. I'm willing to put my hand to the plow. I'm willing to do that. What will give you that? Have you reflected enough on that? Have you thought about that? Or have you resigned? Have you become the drunken peasant in the back in the cart? Have you lost or never developed passion for who you want to become, for what you want to achieve in your life? Now, this is not necessarily about achievement, by the way. It can be who you want to be rather than what you want to do. But where's your passion? So you have to find your passion. That's the task. Purpose in life has a passionate element to it. Another aspect of this, which will help you along the way, is to discover your core values. Now, your core values are the principles by which you wish to lead your life by. Something that actually gives you a sense of, I'm going to elevate these things. And everybody, when they look at it, will find that they have certain values that are actually more important than others. For example, one of my core values is independence. That's really, really strong for me. Some people living in an ordered world is something that's very important for them. For others, being able to have a lot of humor and fun, and just fun orientated. These are not right and wrong. These values and identifying what those core values are it's not about ethics. It's not about morality. It's not about good and evil. It's not about right and wrong. It's about the principles that you consider to be most valuable in your life. I'll give you an example. For some people, security is a very, very important value. And security is related to your emotional well-being. See, when you're following your core values, you feel right. You feel like you're actually operating in the world according to a script that is your own, that you've actually discovered this for yourself. So, whereas in your society and in your culture, and often in your family, there may be values that they are upholding that don't sit so well with you. So if security is something that is really important for you, to feel a sense of being able to predict the future, a sense of safety and being able to, save up and have a little bit of a nest egg for yourself and be able to pay your bills on time, and we'll say that financial part of it, that may be a value that you have that's very important. It's very important to you. It may not be very important to somebody else. But if you don't honor that core value, you start experiencing stress and distress in your life. Whereas somebody else for whom, being able to take a risk is an important core value. They want to be able to not know. They want to be able to have the excitement of being close to the edge of things, maybe. Adventurous. The person who actually has an adventure, wants to go on the adventure, and believes that, if we can take a metaphor, oh, well, I find the food on the way, I'll be able to pick the berries and I'll be able to do all that, and I'll make a little trap for rabbit and I'll cook them over or whatever, if you're outdoors or whatever. That other person, that's the adventure. The other person's coming with a packed lunch and the phone and the emergency numbers for everything and first aid kit. They're a different person, different personality. But so your free spirit, you've got someone who values his free spirit, somebody who values reliability. For others, there's a need to be focused on a particular thing. For others, there's a sense of sort of, well, no, I don't really need that. I can multitask. So our values are important indicators and guides for our sense of purpose in life. So there's a task involved in actually being able to recognize which are your core values, 5, 6 fundamental principles by which you wish to live your life, the guidance that you want to take. So as part of your workbook, you will have actually seen that I will have given you a list of values to actually work on and to consider, to reflect. And it doesn't mean that any of them are right or wrong, but what it does mean is if you can identify maybe the 4 or 5 that are actually fundamental that you need for you to feel comfortable in your life, to feel good, to feel that you're following your guide, that will help, because then you're able to evaluate how you're using your resources. Your purpose in life needs to define how you spend your resources. If you have no sense of purpose in life, then what happens is that your resources are taken by whatever is nearest to hand. And there is an enormous amount of influence going on in the world whereby people are demanded off sold ideas. The classic example is, how often do you change your car? I think I mentioned this in somewhere along in lecture 2 or lecture 3. Do you actually say, well, if I'm going to use those resources, then I won't have those resources to invest in something that maybe gets me closer to what my passion is. One thing that you need to understand as well is that one resource that you can't replace is time. This is important because an awful lot of resources you can replace them. If you're spending money or whatever, well, maybe you can go and earn more money, but you can't earn more time. So that means that there's an important piece to that puzzle, which is to say, right, okay, if I'm following my passion, and part of following my passion is actually identifying my values, then I'm going to make this evaluation about how I'm spending my time, how I'm spending my energy. If you think about your resources, you've got your time. We all have a certain amount of time. We don't know what time we have left. If you've lost anyone in the prime of their life that's close to you, it gets even closer to, it makes it more intense, that experience of losing somebody. I lost somebody very precious to me in her early 50s, and it had a very, very profound effect. But I was already highly concerned or sort of aware of the journey of authenticity and living a good life and following your dream and doing that. But it just really confirmed it to me more clearly. Because you don't want to be able to look back at your life and think, and it's like, I think Anthony de Mello says that is when you're on your deathbed and you look back at your life and you don't recognize, you think it looks like it was somebody else's life, then it's too late. So time is important. So identifying the values that guide you, and then being able then to actually recognize and make that evaluation of how you're using the resources, the time resources, your energy resources, your physical energy. I'm getting older, and I'm fighting it. I'm a bit like, as Dylan Thomas says, do not go gently into that good night, but rage against the dying of the light. And I find myself resisting this because, when you're getting out of your car and you hear yourself groaning a bit, you know that the old system is beginning to kind of wear out. You think, oh no, or why am I tired when I shouldn't be? That kind of stuff. So time, energy, money, and also your personality traits, your intelligence, your thinking time. The use of your physical body and the 5 senses that you have, what you're looking at, what you're watching, what you're doing, that can be sucked away from you so easily. So you can get bogged down in superficiality. So avoiding superficiality. So being able to measure, you're identifying your passion, identifying the values that guide you there, being able to evaluate how you're using the resources that you have in pursuing that. And then what you avoid superficiality. That everybody needs a bit of amusement. Everybody needs downtime. Time to kind of, like, if you think about actually sitting out in the sunshine, reading a potboiler rubbish book, hopefully one that's really reasonably well written and the storyline goes, and that's grand, you know. What's productive about that? And actually, it's recharging your batteries for the next part of the race. But what happens if the amusement becomes the center? Then you end up with that experience of ennui or ennui, that sense of emptiness, that sense of, you know, that what Frankl calls that existential vacuum in your life, that feeling of emptiness. No matter what you do with it, you fill it up with stuff, it doesn't do it. Fill it up with material, fill it up with money, fill it up with sex, fill it up with whatever it is, but it doesn't touch the soul. So superficiality is an important thing to avoid, and this is where the trap of the digital age has really caused us so much distraction. We have to realize that human beings, our human brains, are very sensitive organs, and the algorithms and the engineers who organize screen time, the Facebooks, the Twitter feed, the YouTube, all of that stuff, there's a design going on behind a lot of it. This hasn't got anything to do with some mad conspiracy theories, by the way. This is just a factual reality. There's a department in the engineering, software engineering in Stanford University. The department there developed to a science, section of science called captology. And captology is the science of keeping a human mind or a human brain, a human being on screen. That's what it's for. Now, why is that? Well, very simply, if you keep a human being looking at a screen, even 5 seconds longer than they would have if you hadn't put the stuff on the screen to keep them there, then they're not as amenable to what you want them for. And what you want them for is you want to sell them things. And that means you make money. So captology is the science of keeping people on screen longer, because the people who want to sell, and these can be selling commodities, they can be selling ideas, selling political beliefs, they can be selling ideological situations. They pay for this, they're paying for this because that, and they fund that because if you keep 1 million people 5 seconds longer, what does that mean? Out of that 1 million people, that 5 seconds longer, maybe 10,000 of them will actually be tweaked enough to see something that they want to buy. So the commodification of the human being, and this is what you've got to look at in terms of having a passion and having a purpose in life, is you've got to be aware that there are systems going on which actually don't want you to live a purposeful life. They want to hijack your life in order to use your resources to create their wealth. They want to train you into somebody who will give you a sense of purpose by giving you something to believe, by giving you a commodity that will shape you in such ways that you'll feel that somehow you're a better person. So the science of captology is designed, and it's done in such a way, it's based on the same principles as the slot machine. You often wonder when you look at you look at a film of a documentary, let's say, on Las Vegas. It's extraordinary. People who sit there all day long. How does that happen? How does that work? I mean, human beings have a great resistance to boredom. Boredom is something that we can't tolerate. In fact, we need to learn how to tolerate boredom a bit better. So how is it that you could sit for 6 hours, 10 hours sitting at a slot machine, pressing the button? Because the behavioral psychologists we're able to design it in such a way that you'd have enough stimulation and enough reward to stay at it. It's called operant conditioning. You have a behavior, you get a reward. So there are different, what are called schedules of reinforcement. This is all based on Skinner's model of operant learning. And seemingly the most powerful form of reinforcement is that when you never really can guess when you're going to get the reward, but you're always going to get a reward within a certain time frame. So you don't know when it's going to happen, but it will happen eventually. So when you're on the slot machine, there's a thing called extinction in behavioral psychology. Extinction comes when the reward eventually doesn't come and the behavior wears out and they just don't do it anymore. But the slot machine people understand. So there's 3 or 4 different things going on. The visuals are certainly part of it. There's visual stimulation all the time, so you're distracted by the visual. And the colors are very important because they're triggering certain colors that have significance. The reds, the oranges, the greens, the blues, there's powerful colors going on there. The lighting is very important because there's intermittent lighting, the kind of some of them that the stars are flying around and everything. So your brain is very, very, is in a hyperactive, stimulated condition. And you're still pressing the button and then you're watching the tumbrils going and everything else. And then every now and again, you get a reward. So the reward comes, then the bells go off, the lights flash up. And as a human being, because you still have a frog brain, you still have the fundamental, very primal structure in your neurons that belong in a frog who sits on a lily pad all day. If you think about boredom, there's a dog, but every now and again, little dragonfly comes across and boom, there, gets his reward. But he doesn't have higher consciousness. His system is designed for that visual trap that comes and gets sort of dramatically by the picture of the dragonfly and the movement, the instinctual reactive is the tongue comes out, gets the thing, whatever, he's happy to. So people sitting at slot machines are a little bit like a frog sitting on a little lily pad waiting for the reward. That can soak up so much of your time. In terms of purpose in life, avoiding the superficiality means being able to identify how much time are you wasting doing something that has nothing to do with your direction in life or nothing to do with your passion. And it means being able to recognize that and become more aware of that and actually deciding to walk away. Remember, go back to Plato's cave and we think about the fundamental pieces, the turning away from something. I remember I had a client once, and back to the football thing. Every single week of his life, he was a massive supporter of, we'll say, I'm going to tell a lie here, I know the truth, which is we'll say he was a Chelsea fan. He wasn't, it was a different team. But this was the thing, and he came to talk to me because he was in very bad shape. Emotionally, he was going through a very hard time in his life, felt that the whole thing had fallen apart, his relationship, his marriage, everything else. Found himself getting more and more despairing because this is the desperation that Henry David Thoreau talked about, that, that underneath the amusements, there's this sense of desperation. And as we worked together, he couldn't believe it because he would be sending texts to his friends all week long about the match, about who was dropped and who scored what and everything else. He lived for it every week. This is what gave him a sense of purpose in life. And one of the side effects of this, I made no judgment at all about that. I thought this is what he likes to do. It gives him a sense of pleasure. I mean, who am I to judge whether somebody can get enjoyment out of that? But as a natural sort of effect of him becoming more self-aware and finding some other understandings of himself and a deeper awareness of what he could do and things that he could maybe try, confidence in himself. He didn't feel that he had any work left, didn't understand that he could do things differently, he felt very trapped in his life and all that. Gradually he got to the point that he didn't care about Chelsea anymore at all. I mean, it just left completely. He just would talk to me and say, I just have no interest. And he said, I look back and I think, I don't know how in the world or what was wrong with me to just be so bound up in whether this football thing did any good or not. Actually, I heard a quotation from Bill Shankly. Let me see if I can find it here. He was in an interview. He's sort of a very famous football coach back in the day. I think it was Leeds United. He was a coach, and he was being interviewed about this, and he said, some people. He said, I've heard some people say that football is a matter of life and death. Yeah, he said. Some people believe football is a matter of life and death. And he said, I'm very disappointed with that attitude. I can assure you it's much, much more important than that. And so I just thought it was funny because I think it was a bit of tongue in cheek for him, but actually he was naming something really important. So superficiality is something you can get fully lost in, and it can suck you away from what you need to be doing. Pursue the transcendent. This brings us back then into closer to the bigger picture of meaning and purpose in life. The transcendent, that part of you which goes beyond yourself. Now, Viktor Frankl spoke of this in terms of what we've talked about as self-actualization, actualizing the potentials, knowing that finding your strengths, finding your values, and expressing them. And he was concerned that the self-actualization model, which was the idea that just left to yourself and just doing what you want, basically that idea that you just cultivate yourself all the time, was incredibly narcissistic and self-indulgent. I don't think it has to be that. In fact, I strongly am of the view that there's what's called a dialectic between self-actualization and self-transcendence. But he gave a very good metaphor for this. He said the eye does not see itself. So when you think about that, the function of the eye is not to see itself. It's to see what is beyond it. So if we think about purpose in life and the self, we think maybe the self is not for itself, but has something beyond itself. The transcendent is to transcend yourself, to go beyond. And this is why purpose in life does that. The sense of purpose in life cannot simply be to just do everything for yourself. A sense of purpose in life needs to pull you out of that. Now, in order to do that effectively, you need to have a strong sense of understanding of who you are, what you want to live for, and then you go for it. Because self-indulgence, just using all of the resources around you to simply gratify your instinctual needs will lead to despair. Philip Rieff, who is traditionally he was a critique of what he called the therapeutic, the triumph of the therapeutic. I remember coming across a quotation from him many years ago. I haven't been able to track down the source of it, but I know it was him. And he said the cultivation of the self, taken as an ideal, is no guarantee against stagnation and despair. So this is an important in terms of where we're going now from here. This is the end of this course on self-awareness. But now, with that in mind, there's the other parts of the journey, which are like, how do we build good relationships? How do we build relationships that are solid, that are functioning, that are healthy, that bring joy and bring goodness? What does it mean to become a moral person? How do we guide? How do we become? What kind of morality have we? What does it mean to be morally mature? How do we fit in the world? How do we fit? Remember, I used the metaphor of a leaf and a tree. I think in the third lecture, it's talking about, we look at, you think that the leaf is the self, the leaf is the individual human, and then the tree is the human species, the human family, all that goes with that. Where does the leaf fit on the tree? The leaf is not the tree, but the tree cannot cope without its leaves. So, our task in these 6 lectures has been for you to develop a deeper and richer understanding of yourself as a human being. To understand what makes you tick, to understand how you have come to where you are in the history arc. But now when we think about cultivating a sense of meaning and purpose in life, we're now moving towards, well, what do you do with all of that information? Where do you take it? What does living the good life mean to you? So one of the other pieces I would say to you in relation to this is to recognize the good moments. Our neurology, evolution has given us some defense mechanisms, coping mechanisms. And one coping mechanism it has given us is that things that hurt us, things that endanger us, stay longer in our consciousness. So things that go bad are more easily remembered. And the reason why that is that when things are going bad, we need to figure out how to make sure they don't happen again. Now, unfortunately, a great number of people don't really learn from that. And they don't understand how to maybe interpret it properly so they can avoid it again. But this does not mean that doesn't take away from this fact that you can very easily become focused too much on the negative, the things that go wrong, rather than things that go right. And so what we have to do in terms of purpose in life, in terms of meaning in life, is we need to learn how to celebrate the moments, the good moments in our lives, to celebrate what we have that is helpful to us, to enjoy them, to savor it. You know, you see some people when they're eating food, you can look and you see them, and I watch people sometimes, but I watch people all the time. It's just it's an occupation hazard to watch people. Now, I don't do it on purpose. I never want to invade anybody's privacy, but I just notice things. It's like a policeman walking along the street. He'll notice whether the tax is out on somebody's car. He's not even on duty. He'll see it because, it's part of the training. So, being able to notice the good things and being able to celebrate them and give them time. So I notice that sometimes even when people are eating, some people are not tasting their food. You can see people who have food and they're enjoying it. They're not celebrating it, but they're tasting it. You know that they're having this moment where this is actually an enjoyable experience for them. We can use that metaphor for thinking about the good moments in our lives. This is what the people who talk about the power of now talk about. I'll be exploring all of that in another course, the whole philosophical basis for that in Buddhism and where it fits in our modern world and how it can be put to good use for us and things we need to watch out for, that we don't get lost in a particular philosophy and an ideology that is not actually going to help us to become healthy people. But that said, the power of now is the notion of having the moment, being in this moment, and being able to know who you are in this moment and enjoy those moments for when they're touching your soul, being able to experience them and being able to find more of those experiences, cultivating experiences that are good for you. But you will be much better able to cultivate those experiences if you know which ones to go for, which ones relate to you, which ones belong to you, which ones are at the core of your being, rather than the ones that everybody else says, this is how you should be in the world. Don't dance to someone else's tune, I suppose, is another way of putting this. Who's playing the tune that you're dancing to. Being aware of that, being aware of making your own music, being aware of that. And out of that wealth and out of that growth that goes on for you, you will find that you will be able to offer something to the world and to other people. One of the most difficult things that happens to some people is that they give away things they don't have, and that's impoverishes them. Because I have great belief in the notion of giving and loving and caring and all of those extraordinary things, but you have to have it before you give it away. And I remember a Christian psychologist way back that had a big effect on my thinking when I was in my 20s. He's a Swiss psychiatrist called Paul Tournier, and he came up with a phrase that I thought was just lovely. He had this phrase called premature abdication. Abdicating before, giving away something before you've had it. Sacrificing yourself before you've had a self. That's a form of codependency, but it leads to exhaustion, and it leads to bitterness and despair and unhappiness. And you can be exhausted from giving. We've all seen that, the burnout possibilities. So having cultivating your own sense of purpose in life will help to nourish your soul, it will help to strengthen you, but it will also mean that you have something to give to the world. And what you want to give to the world and how that works out in all the areas of yourself as a citizen of a society, as a person in a family, as a parent, as a child, as a spouse, that all belongs in the world of our relationships with other people. And that's another course that I'm developing and I should have ready soon. So, thank you for joining me on this venture of the examined life. It's been a pleasure and a privilege to do this, put this together. I hope it is helpful and useful and that you enjoy it. And if you have, tell your friends, and you can go back over all of this content because it's kind of timeless. I started looking at this stuff 35 years ago. It means the same and better and different 35 years on. So, that's it. Take care of yourself. Bye.